Good afternoon, everyone. We're back here. We're going to be talking a little bit about social etiquette today. I hope everyone's had a safe weekend. And for you in the Midwest, hopefully you have done just fine with the weather situation.
Mm-hmm.
So we will go ahead and get started. The first question that came in is, how do you know what's appropriate to wear for different types of formal events without feeling overdressed or underdressed?
I have had this problem a few times where you just you get invited to what's called a formal event, but you don't know how formal they're talking. You don't know what kind of formal. Sometimes it can be a little confusing. Um, you can always, look up outfit ideas, but a good neutral formal outfit can be straight leg pants, jeans, straight leg pants, or like a slack. Um, I would stick to blue or black and make sure there's no holes. That would be more formal. Um, and then I would do more of like a neutral colored long sleeve shirt. I don't think you can go wrong with that. Something that goes up to your collarbones. A good rule is if you put your hand, it's kind of hard to see. Hopefully, I described this okay. But you open your palm of your hand and you put your thumb and your index finger kind of close up to your neck, kind of like you're choking yourself, but um, and your shirt shouldn't go below your hand, the bottom of your hand. That's a good indicator of how high your shirt should be in a formal event. Um, and then your shoes is important as well. Uh, Try to wear cleaner shoes. If you don't have like a flat or kind of like a more formal closed toe shoe, you could do a tennis shoe, get away with like a black or white tennis shoe, I would say. Um, and socks, make sure you're not wearing crazy socks. Make sure they're black and white. That little stuff matters. So I would do, yeah, the jeans, the slacks, long sleeve t-shirt, tennis shoes if that's all you have. I think is a good neutral formal outfit.
Another thing is if you get an invitation, usually there's an RSVP,
Hmm.
and that's usually a pretty good indicator that it's a little bit more formal than normal. So you may just keep that in mind. Okay, the second question is, what should you do if you accidentally break a rule of etiquette at a formal gathering, like arriving late or missing a cue?
Okay, so if I'm gonna go like against the examples that were given, so say I arrive late at an event that I was invited to, um, we have to take accountability, right? So I would go up to the person that invited me, so the invitee, or maybe the host. It depends on like the type of situation. And I would apologize for my late arrival. Um, Obviously, good social etiquette, like we talked about, is greeting the people that invited you or greeting the people that you talk to, especially at a formal event. So making sure you apologize for a late arrival is something I would do. Um, Maybe you could stay later and help the cleanup to kind of make up for the time, or, you know, do a little bit extra to kind of make up for the time that you lost. Something along those lines would be a good way to, stay accountable on yourself or give accountability. Um, and missing a cue, like saying somebody is uncomfortable and you just kind of missed that cue, or maybe you stood too closely to them and they were like I said, uncomfortable, and you just kind of missed that or went over your head. Um, I would again apologize, because that's not something we want to do, is make people uncomfortable, especially if it wasn't your intention. I don't think anybody would hold a grudge on you for that, especially if there was an apology, and just kind of pay attention to your behavior afterwards. I talked about the social etiquette of, the physical social etiquette and communication etiquette. of how we should be communicating with people, especially people that we're not really close to yet, more of your acquaintances. Just be more aware of what you're doing because some things can offend people and some things can make people uncomfortable. So just stay aware of your behaviors from now on, especially if you catch yourself missing a cue.
Okay. There's a good rule of thumb to follow. And let's say the event starts at 7:30 and you arrive at 7:30. Basically, you're 5 minutes late.
Mhm.
So the rule of thumb is you always want to arrive at least 5 to 10 minutes ahead of time and plan for that in case something does go awry on your way there. The other thing is, and it's more in the line of manners, and that is if it's going to be a formal dinner, you may want to Google how you use your napkin and silverware when you're eating. Um, Most people probably in the house they live in probably don't necessarily practice that, but it's a good habit if you're going to someplace that is quite formal to review proper eating habits.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Next question is what's the right balance between correcting someone's rude public behavior, and just ignoring it for your own peace?
This one can be a little tricky because if some say, somebody's being loud in a store and it's annoying you and you say something, that person may get offended and may start yelling, or you just don't know the person's reaction. That's the thing in the situation that you're not going to be able to control, and that's the other person's reaction and what they do. So, if you're in public and you're finding yourself getting annoyed with something that, someone's not using their manners or someone's not using good social etiquette, but it's not hurting you, your boundaries aren't being compromised, you may be irritated, but I think in that situation it'd be more appropriate to leave yourself instead of correcting their behavior. I know it can be a little different when it comes to being a mom and having kids in public and, say somebody comes and does something that's compromising your kid's boundary a little bit. I think that can be handled differently, but something that I can't really talk about because it's not something I really relate to. Um, but I think the only really time that it's appropriate to maybe correct their behavior or make somebody aware of something is if it's truly like compromising a boundary of yours. If somebody is, roughhousing in a store, say teenage boys, girls, whatever, roughhousing in a store and they're throwing things around and you get hit with something, I think saying something then would be more appropriate um, because it actually physically affected you or say another example would be if somebody was maybe too close to you in a store and they keep pushing you with their cart on accident, maybe just making it aware like, "Hey, your cart is pushing me," something like that, very direct and simple, um, I think would be the only appropriate time to really correct behavior. Uh, and I think that's all I had.
Okay, I'm going to add something
Yeah.
here. Most of you, if you're teenagers or early adults, at some point at time, you're going to go to a party where there's alcohol served. And depending if you're taking someone with you that is a friend or a date, I think it's very appropriate that you both review what behavior is going to be appropriate in that setting. And if you know the person you're with has a tendency to get intoxicated And generally, when people get intoxicated, they can be rather brash and idiots.
Mhm.
Um, and I think in times like that, it is appropriate if it's been discussed ahead of time. It's appropriate at that time to take that person aside and not in a public forum, but in a private um, place and have that discussion with them. And if that doesn't correct it, then it's time to leave.
Mhm.
Um, and like I said, many of you that are listening to this either have been to parties where that's alcohol has been served, and you've probably experienced that. That's just something that's important if you're taking a friend or a date, that you get this worked out ahead of time so that it doesn't create a conflict and doesn't create a distraction with other people around you. Okay, next question is, how do you handle a friend who overshares or vents too much without hurting their feelings?
Okay, so I'm kind of like looking at this in the perspective that, maybe they're oversharing to the point where, clearly it's becoming a concern of yours, or maybe you've become like mentally exhausted because of it, or their problems are now becoming your problems and are taking priority in your life when, that shouldn't be happening. Um, so in that situation, because as friends, we should be able to come to each other and vent sometimes about some things. But some people do it too often and too much, and um, kind of overcrowd the other person with their problems. And like I said, it's okay in some things, but some friends do it all the time, and that's the only time you're talking is about their problems. And I think in that situation, some people aren't aware of that. I've had friends in the past who just genuinely weren't aware of what they're doing and didn't know that it made me feel that way. And a simple conversation of, "Hey, this is, I have an emotional well being too. This is um, kind of making me go crazy, making me stressed out, because some people, when you share your problems, have that feeling, or especially if you care about them, you're going to want to fix their problems or maybe want to give them good advice. And so now it's like a constant train of thought of somebody else's problems. So like I said, a reminder that you have emotional well-being too. Um, and their problems being on your shoulders deprive you of focusing on your personal problems and the things going on in your life. And that's setting a boundary. Hey, maybe we can talk about this at a certain time, or maybe if we want to, because as girls, especially, we like to, I guess, debrief. And so I think there's appropriate times to do that. And it's not heavily focused on every single time you guys are together. Like, for example, me and my friends, we hang out with we'll hang out at certain times, and at those times are the times that we get to talk about all of our problems and overshare. And but it's only reserved to those times because those are our private times. It's a certain time, and we're talking about certain things, and it's kind of more of a group moment instead of heavily focusing um the relationship on being a venting one. um and there's also been cases where that is still not corrected, and it's people are still oversharing, and it's still that relationship with that friend is still based on negativity and their problems and the things going on in their life. And if things aren't changing and that boundary is still kind of being crossed, I think a conversation of maybe a break or even possibly just growing from that person may be an option. Yes. So I would just, give them that reminder and set that boundary.
Okay, I think in addition to that, I think it's important when someone is choosing to share something with you. I think it's just common etiquette that we acknowledge the issue.
Hmm.
Now, if this has been a reoccurring conversation and in the past you have provided maybe some insight, it's very appropriate to just recognize that you're not there to fix them because we don't fix people.
Hmm.
Secondly, if you have given them some ideas to address their problem, it would be very appropriate at that point to ask them where they at in following through on that suggestion.
Hmm.
Because it's very important for people to take account of their own behavior. And far too often you can get into situations where you're playing the same song over and over again, and it's a lot of wasted time because nothing is coming out of it that's going to have a productive outcome. But I think it's very important to be as empathetic as possible, but also be polite about it, but being firm regarding it.
Hmm.
They may not like it, but they will respect you for at least taking the stance you've taken. I think it's just important to realize we don't fix other people's problems. And I think far too often, and I think with teenage girls especially, um, maybe it's, what was the word you used? Not deprogramming,
Debriefing.
debriefing.
Yes.
Interesting term.
Yes.
I think it's more, we'll use debriefing, but I think those debriefings become perpetual.
Yes.
And I think that's especially prone with teenage girls. And again, I think it's just, if you know what you're needing to do, I think it also represents a very good role model for others that are involved in that situation for them to learn from. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to the next one here. What is considered social etiquette of a guy on the first date? Now, before you address this, Alexis,
Okay.
I'm going to bring out a point here. I deal with a lot of teenage girls. I've had 3 teenage daughters, and our rule of thumb has always been before you go out on a date, you do what we call due diligence. And that is you find out as much as you can find out about that individual. And you also find out what their motive is for going out on a date with you.
Hmm.
Okay, you can have it.
Okay. And after you have kind of done your little self-assessment, um, after you kind of do that little self-assessment and you've determined that that guy is, you're gonna go on a date with that guy and he's maybe someone you're interested in. I think it's important for the guy to ask you on the date. I know in some situations and circumstances it's not um it doesn't happen that way, but I think it's a good like you said, rule of thumb to determine their motive if that person asks you on a date. I know some guys do it with the more malicious intent, kind of say what I want to hear type thing, but planning a date and telling you what time the date is and what kind of appropriate attire it is to wear, because you never know whether you're going bowling or you're going to a nice restaurant. um I think chivalry is a good thing, and what I mean by that is manners by holding the door, pulling out the seat, maybe opening the car door.
That's the guy opening the car door for the girl. Just if
Yes.
you're confused.
Yes, I'm talking about as a guy, I'm talking what guys need to be doing in the date part. Um, chivalry is also asking about your boundaries. Some people kiss on the first date, some people don't. That's something that should be asked, if it was going to proceed or happen. And then engagement and conversation. I hear a lot of the time, "This guy took me on a date and he went to the bathroom 15 times and has not has been on his phone the entire time." And that would not be an engaging conversation. You you don't know. It's just clearly you are on a date and you have kind of your motive is to get to know each other and he's not getting to know you. And that's just kind of a flag of maybe we shouldn't be on this date. But engaging in conversation, putting your phone down, asking them about themselves, kind of more broad questions at first. Some people can be a little bit too direct at first. Um, I've heard of girls going on dates and the guy saying that they love them on the first date. That, for one, is not true. You can't love someone on meeting them for the first time. That things like that.
Should be a very good clue of what the motive behind those
Right.
comments are.
Because in that case, that person is telling you what you want to hear. Um, and the pay thing, I think it's a good thing and it's appropriate for the guy to offer to pay just because you asked to go on a date. Um, that's kind of the point is to, I guess, impress the girl and show her that you're worth dating. And I think that goes both ways as well. But in your case, as a more, male dominated area, that would be your area. And so offering to pay is something you maybe should do. Um, but in some cases, I think maybe should be talked about beforehand. But if you're younger, maybe teenagers, maybe you have a job, but you're working low hours and you have things to pay, like your car insurance, whatever the case may be, split pay is okay too. Especially if you're young. I'm not saying if he didn't pay for your entire meal that he's a horrible human being. Um, and especially this day and age, things like that aren't taught very often. And so it may not be out of a bad intent, but more of lack of awareness because it wasn't taught or they haven't seen it growing up, but it should be a thing, and that's why I'm talking about it. And then, like I said, asking about your personal boundaries, that's, important because, like I said, goes in for a kiss and that's not what you want, and now your date's kind of awkward and possibly ruined. It can go any way. So those are my little list of things.
Okay, I'm going to add to this,
Okay.
and that is if the guy says he's going to pick you up at 7 and doesn't show up till 7:20, it should be a good clue. He's not punctual, which means it's a lack of respect,
Mhm.
unless there's an emergency situation. At the other end of that is there should be a set time that
Mhm.
the date needs to end. Now,
Mhm.
growing up with my daughters, they had curfews. And when they had dates, the curfew was about an hour earlier than their normal curfew.
Mhm.
Um, secondly, I think, and I'm going to speak to teenage girls, because some of you, when I say due diligence, you don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But it's probably not real likely that the guy asking you out in high school hasn't asked out other girls that you associate with.
Mhm.
And it's probably a good thing to find out what their experiences were prior to making a commitment to go out with this guy. The other thing is that far too often you teenage girls become infatuated with certain guys that are going to ask you out because you think you are the princess and the only one, only to find out the motives probably were not too true.
Mhm.
In terms of this pay thing, one thing that I think is very appropriate is, at least on the first two dates, is that you split pay. It sets a boundary on what that date's going to be.
Mhm.
I think far too often teenage girls think of a date as a commitment, and it's not a commitment at all. It needs to be looked at as a friendship,
Mhm.
because if it's not, if a friendship isn't established from this, it's not going to end well.
Right.
Um, so I would keep those in mind also as you venture out into your dating world. And I know this may sound a little conservative, but there's a lot of time conservative eliminates a lot of future problems
Mhm.
that you may not want to deal with. So enough said on that. The next one is how can you tell when it's time to let a relationship go for your peace of mind, and how can you do it respectfully? Now I'm going to answer this. I'm going to tell you what not to do. First of all, you don't break up over the internet.
Mm-mm.
You don't break up over Snapchat.
No.
My one daughter had that experience, and I thought that was about as cowardly as could be. So that's cardinal rule number one. It's not done over social media. It's
Mm.
done in person.
Right.
Go ahead.
That's the most respectful way to do it is in person. But I think the good way to know that, maybe it's time to let this relationship go and maybe there isn't more grace to be given. And that's just when, either boundaries are being crossed that shouldn't be crossed, um, or they're being crossed more than once because like I said, there's exceptions to everything. Um, but our values can change as well. And as humans, they will change as we grow. I think everyone has core values that don't change very often, that are very kind of mainstream, but that doesn't mean that they don't change. And sometimes people have core values that your other partner doesn't have, and you just kind of you're in that relationship hoping that they will value what you value, and they just don't because it's not something they do value. And in that situation, people can't coexist because those are your core values and that's how you're going to live your life, and that's sometimes a different lifestyle and different perspective than somebody who doesn't have those values. And that's when they can't coexist, and that's when we need to realize that you can't coexist in that relationship and that you cannot change anybody's values. And hoping for change is just a waste of time. It's blunt, it's harsh, but it's true. It's blunt. Cuz what that is, it's causing in the more broad term, like, disadvantage in both of you. It's a strain in the entire relationship. It's a strain as sometimes your character, and that's when we need to end it. And I think sharing that perspective of whether they did something, like, cross your boundary, you share that perspective, and that's a good way of ending a relationship. There's really no conversation that needs to be had, um, beyond that. Um, but if it's a value thing, that person's just not aligning with your values or your lifestyle or your growth, sharing that perspective as well. Um, these values don't align with this and this won't work with this, is a respectful way of ending it. You're to the point. Um, and sometimes you will find relationships where, it's kind of a negotiation when you're trying to end things and they're like, well, if I do this and this and this, maybe we can stay together. But if you are coming to that person and you're ending a relationship, there isn't any room for negotiation. Your decision needs to be firm and it needs to be direct. And like I said, there should be no room for negotiation, even though there may be an attempt of it.
Cardinal rule number 2 is, and this is for you teenage girls,
Hmm.
is I know Alexis has used the term debriefing. I think if you're going to break up with a guy, I think it's totally inappropriate that it's done in a committee meeting. And by that, I mean you're already told all your girlfriends what you're going to do. Now, the probability that's not going to get back to him before you actually talk to him is almost as high as the sun rising in the west. It ain't going to happen.
Hmm.
So I think there needs to be a level of respect, and that probably is confidentiality.
Yeah.
But I also understand teenage girls very well, and it usually doesn't end up that way. Usually, by the time it needs to be, the relationship needs to end, at least one other person has already filled that individual in. It may be a girlfriend that's dating one of his friends, but just show enough respect and courtesy to keep it to yourself until you actually have the opportunity to sit down. Because think of it on the other side is if he was going to break up with you, are you wanting to hear it from a third party or do you want to hear it directly from him? And I think you know the answer to that.
Hmm.
So, um, the other cardinal rule number 3 is that I don't know how many thousand times I've heard it that we're still going to be friends. The reality of it is you're not going to be
Mm-mm.
because it's moved beyond a friendship because it probably never started out as a friendship. And that's the whole point is if it's not a friendship initially that eventually moves into a dating relationship, it's not going to end as a friendship either. So those are my 3 cardinal rules. Okay, next
Nice.
question.
Okay.
What should you do if your child has a meltdown or needs attention during a formal event? And this would be an event where children are invited.
Mhm. Yeah, like for example, if you were going and you were going to see your big sister at a play, or you were going at your big sister, big brother's school to watch them graduate, just kind of a more public family um, situation where we're honoring somebody else. That's where the formal part comes in, where we need to be using our formal social etiquette, paying attention to the speaker, honoring the people that we're there to honor. And if I thought I was qualified, I'm a little qualified to answer this because I'm not a mom, but I do have the experience, so I do think I'm qualified to answer this. And I would say it is a big distraction, if a kid's crying. It's especially as moms, we tend to, um, look and see who's crying or what's happening, and kids are dramatic, so they like to scream like they're dying, over something small. So in that case, we don't wanna distract the guests, and we need to remove the child for a break, maybe 5 minutes, maybe we need a little discipline, whatever the case may be. Every case is different. I think trying again is appropriate because, like I said, kids are going to be kids, and you're probably going to give them, or they're probably going to need um, another chance just because kids are always going to make mistakes like that and they're always going to have meltdowns here and there or do something they're not supposed to. But if trying again and the crying continues, I think it'd be appropriate to kind of leave at that point or maybe um, sit out at that point, whether you find a place in your car or outside of the main area where you're not distracting anybody. But that's just the more appropriate option if we were going to follow social etiquette because we don't want to ruin anybody else's experience by causing a distraction or um, letting the light off the people that needs the light in that moment, the people we are honoring. We don't want to distract anything from the main event.
Okay, in addition to this, as a parent, whether you're a father or a mother, is when that situation arises, people are going to look at you like you're a horrible parent, that you
Mhm,
don't have control of your kid. But the reality of it is, every single parent has been through this.
mhm,
And I think it's just the appropriate thing, knowing that you remove them from the situation um, out of courtesy to everybody else.
mhm,
And it's also a very good teaching time for that child. It's not a time to punish them as much as it is a time to discipline, to explain to them why that was inappropriate for what they did. And again, kids are kids, and the younger ones, it's harder for them to comprehend that. But I think you have to have enough understanding and confidence as a parent to know it's very normal that these things happen
mhm.
and you don't beat yourself up because you got a kid that maybe didn't get the nap that he was supposed to get or some other situation. So just deal with it. And in 98% of the time, the audience will have already forgotten about it. But
Right.
the worst thing you can do is defer it and just allow the child to act unruly without removing him because it's a horrible distraction.
Then they'll really remember you.
You won't be invited back. Okay, next question. How do I politely shut down unwanted conversations in public settings when you're not in the mood to talk?
Okay. Um, if you're in public and you're not in the mood to talk, I think that's something that we need to kinda I don't wanna be harsh, but it kind of just get over, especially if you're in public, um, and somebody's coming up to you, I think it's the most appropriate to acknowledge what they're saying, um, even when you're not in the mood. But say we're in a position to where, I don't know, maybe you're about to cry or something and, everyone's probably found themselves in a public setting, whether you're at school or at the store and you're about to cry and the next person who talks to you, you're probably gonna bust out in tears. Um, my best go-to line for that, but even you can also use this after you acknowledge conversation too, because like I said, it's important to acknowledge what somebody says to you, especially if you're getting greeted or you see somebody that you haven't seen in a while. Saying hi and, entertaining the conversation for a little bit is appropriate, but saying, like, "Unfortunately, I have limited time, it was so nice to see you, but it was so nice to see you, I've gotta go." Something around the lines, of that, being direct, but being very polite as well. We don't wanna make people feel like they're a burden, um, because they're not that. It's over something personal, and it shouldn't be reflected onto the other person. You're not in the mood to talk, so you shouldn't make them feel any type of way about that. So definitely be as respectful as you can, and you may have to compromise a little bit of being comfortable, I guess. Um, but I think it's important because as humans, we need to be able to talk to each other and communicate effectively even when we don't want to. It's part of being human.
The next question is, what's the right way to greet unfamiliar people at formal gatherings without being awkward or shy?
So, I kind of have a little bit of a personal example to this. Something that happened over Thanksgiving. I went to a friend's Thanksgiving this weekend, and she is terrible at introducing me to anybody, and I told her that. I'm like, "Girl, I don't know any of these people, and you're terrible at introducing me to them." And obviously was like a big joke, and I guess it's just something that she does, according to her family. But it was kind of like a lighthearted, funny moment. But in that time, I had to greet them myself, which I have no problem with. Um, but start with hi. A lot of people overthink that. A good hi or hello is perfectly fine. I use hi, my name's Alexis, I'm so and so's friend, or I was invited by so and so. What's your name? Or it's so nice, or yeah, ask them their name. That's important. Maybe who they are to in relation to your friend. It just depends on um, the situation. But greet them, tell them your name, ask them their name, and tell them it was nice talking to them if that's the end of the conversation. I think that's a really simple way to greet somebody, and important, especially if you're going to an event. It is important to introduce yourself to people. Very important.
Okay. And if someone's asked you to go with them, just out of respect and courtesy,
Mm-hmm.
they should introduce you to the other people.
Yes.
And if for some reason they aren't, I think it's a discussion, not then, but after you've left the formal occasion,
Mm-hmm.
because it may be important to find out why they were reluctant to introduce you. Um, and depending on what the answer may be, may indicate the value of that friendship to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our last question is, how do you maintain kindness and respect during disagreements when emotions are high? And I'm going to say something here, and we had talked about this before. When it's time to leave a relationship, that is one of those times when emotions are going to run incredibly high.
Mm-hmm.
So, from that standpoint, how should we deal with that?
From that standpoint, the whole conversation, it's going to be hard to your emotions will be high. It's just something you're probably not going to be able to get out of. But we need to separate the facts from feelings when we are responding. It is so easy to, especially girls, so easy to be snappy and act based on our emotions because we're angry, we're saying something that isn't productive in the conversation, because conversations, especially those conversations where you're either getting to a point, or you're trying to explain your point, or you're trying to find a solution, um, yelling at each other, name calling, um, speaking about, things that we feel instead of focusing on the facts of the situation can sometimes not be a productive conversation. And so, separating the facts and the feelings, it allows you to reframe from the name calling and from the angry exchanges that you may want to have, or even getting overly upset and kind of sometimes when we get overly upset, we'll just, like, I guess, open up our boundaries and compromise them all. Um, but that's why we need to separate the feelings and the facts. And when we can't do that in a situation, we need to take a break. And that's okay. Like if you guys were having a conversation and things are getting heated, you need to take a break. Or, you're uncontrollably sobbing. You need to take a break because it's not going to be a productive conversation. Um, it um, allows you to, make that decision with more of a clear mind, and that's because it's based on the facts, and I feel like it almost helps your brain process it a little bit better, even though you have those feelings, um, but being realistic, it's easier for your brain to process that kind of stuff. I hope that makes sense, basically, of what I'm trying to say, but
Okay, I think one thing you said, Alexis, which is
mhm,
very valid,
yeah.
is especially if you're a teenage girl and the guy's dumping you.
Mhm.
Okay, it's probably one of the more vulnerable times you're going to have
Yeah.
because you're wanting to salvage the relationship, and that's a time when you're most likely going to compromise on your boundaries, and most of the time it's going to involve your body.
Mhm.
And it's very, very important that you understand that and you don't give into it, but it happens very frequently,
Mhm.
especially where a guy is dumping the girl.
Mhm.
It's not so much the other way where the girl's dumping the guy, although it can be very traumatic. Um, Usually it doesn't have anything to do with sexual activity.
Mhm.
So I think that's a very solid point to make.
Yes.
Okay, that takes care of our questions tonight. We hope you join us tomorrow. This is going to be primarily for young mothers. It's going to deal with postpartum and depression. It's going to be a 2 week session that we're going to have. We will have some new moms that will be talking about their experiences they've had. So I hope you decide to tune in tomorrow.
Yes. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. Have a good evening and be
Mm.
safe. See, we're getting at 15 minutes. The last